Alaikum wa rahmatullah. Before I invite Shaykh for the lecture, I would like to remind my dear parents to keep your children with you at all times. If you are going to be using the parents' room, please use them responsibly because we do use those rooms for day school. And please follow the guidance from the volunteers. Please help me welcome Shaykh Azhar with 3 loud salawats.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين اللهم صل على ولعنة الله على أعدائهم ومنكر فضائلهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Respected elders, my dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So, since the 23rd of Dhul Qa'dah, according to one narration, coincides with the Shahada of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, the famous narration is that he was martyred on the 17th of Safar. But we do have a narration that he was martyred in this month. So I don't think there's any harm in having more than one program reflecting on the life and the legacy of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam. I thought it would be beneficial this evening to share some brief insights into a hadith that describes some of the noble characteristics of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam. One of the most important books that we have on the life and the legacy of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam is a book that was compiled by Shaykh al-Saduq, one of the great ulama of our tradition. And he has a book known as Uyun Akhbar Ar-Ridha. Basically, the spring of the narrations from or about Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam. In this book, Shaykh al-Saduq, he compiles narrations that give us a glimpse into the noble traits of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, some of the challenges that he faced, his interactions with Ma'mun, with the Shi'as of his time, and so on. Some of the debates of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam can be found in this book. So the hadith that I want to share with you is a hadith from this book. And the hadith is basically a description of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam by someone who witnessed him, someone who was in Khurasan and who used to observe the private and the public life of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam. So I'll read the narration word for word for you because it has a lot of very practical lessons for us. You know, the purpose of these gatherings is not so we can just hear the virtues of Ali ibn Musa Ridha. The goal is to adopt some of the virtues of Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha. Otherwise, we cannot really call ourselves the Shia of Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha. Shia means what? Shia means a follower. So to follow, we have to become more acquainted with some of his qualities, some of his behaviors, some of the habits of Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam. So the narration is from Ibrahim ibn Abbas. He's the narrator of the hadith. You can find this in the second volume of Uyun Akhbar al-Ridha. He says, ما رأيت الرضا سئل عن شيء قط إلا علمه. He says, I never saw a single instant when Imam al-Ridha where Imam al-Ridha would be asked a question unless the Imam knew the answer. So here, the narrator is saying that what is astounding about Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha is when people would ask him questions, he would always have an answer. There is not a single occasion where someone asks Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam something and he says, I don't know. I have to go do research. I'm not sure. I have to ask. He had an answer. Whether the question was being posed about tafsir of Quran, whether the question was about Islamic law, whether it was about the seerah of the Prophet, whether it was a question about the Tawrat, the Injil, science, physics. He says the Imam, whenever a question would be posed to him, he would have an answer. وَلَا رَأَيْتُ أَعْلَمَ مِنْ بِمَا كَانَ فِي الزَّمَانِ إِلَى وَقْتِهِ وَعَصْرِهِ. And I never met anyone who had more knowledge than him. He was aware of current times, and Ma'mun, he knew that the masses, they had a great love for the family of the Prophet. And he knew that the previous regime, Bani Umayyah, one of the reasons for their downfall was their oppression, their open hostility to the family of the Prophet. So being the shrewd politician that he was, he wanted to give off the impression that we, Banu Abbas, we love Ahlul Bayt. We respect Ahlul Bayt. In fact, Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha is my heir apparent. When I pass away, the Khilafah will be transferred to him. So this was a political move to win the hearts of the people. This was what was on the outside. But internally, Ma'mun wanted to humiliate Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha. So he thought that I need to organize intellectual gatherings. I need to have conferences and seminars whereby the knowledge of Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha can be tested. And I just need one thing to happen. I just need someone in some gathering to pose a question that he doesn't have the answer to, so that his status will diminish in the eyes of the people. So he would invite non-Shia scholars to debate him. And he went so far to even invite the ulama of other religious traditions. He would invite rabbis, priests, Zoroastrians, some of the top atheist philosophers of the time, and they would all bombard him with questions. So in one gathering, Imam al-Ridha alayhi salam has to maneuver from answering tafsir to giving the explanation of a passage in the Old Testament, answering a question about fiqh, and so on and so forth. So this narrator, he says that no matter how much Ma'mun tried to test the extent of his knowledge, the Imam always had an answer. Now here someone might ask, especially when non-Shi'as, when they read these narrations, they say, look at these Shi'as. They are making their Imams into gods, mini gods, demigods. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only one who's all-knowing. Allah is Al-Alim. So how is it that you guys, you Shia, you portray the Imams as all-knowing? They know everything. So what's the difference between God and your Imam? This is an important theological concept to examine. What is the difference? You see, brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we speak about the knowledge of God, number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge is not knowledge that is acquired. It's inherent. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't gain knowledge. His knowledge does not increase. He never experiences ignorance, whereas he doesn't know something and then he learns it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge is infinite. It's not acquired. It's inherent. The knowledge of the prophets and the Imams is acquired knowledge, meaning there was a period when they didn't have the knowledge and they were given the knowledge. It is what? It is an acquired knowledge. Kasbi. It's acquired. Now someone might ask, in our theology, where do the Imams get their knowledge from? Where does this knowledge come from? Especially, when you look at some of the Imams, you look at Imam al-Askari, for example. He's in Samarra, he's under house arrest, he did not study with ulama, yet he is a spring of knowledge. Imam al-Jawad, he's a child. Where does this knowledge come from? How do they acquire this knowledge? We have entire sections in Kitab al-Kafi, which is our most important hadith collection, where the Imams, they actually explain the sources of their knowledge. You and I, because we're ordinary people, the way that we gain knowledge is through conventional means. We're ignorant, and therefore we need to go to school. We need to be taught. There is a limit in terms of how much knowledge we can absorb. Now, when it comes to the Imams of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, the Imams themselves, they explain the sources of their knowledge, where this immense knowledge comes from. So we have a narration from Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq, salawatullahi alayhi. So I need you guys to do me a favor. I need you guys to have a little bit more energy. I know it's Friday and you had a long week and you're tired and you're fighting to get through this lecture that you hope is short by Shaykh Azhar. But inshallah, salawat, as the hadith say, it removes hypocrisy from the hearts. It brings nur into the hearts. So let us revive and energize this gathering with a loud salawat. So Imam al-Sadiq, he explains. He says, Inna lillahi azza wa jal ilmain. All knowledge is from God. But God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has two types of knowledge. Two types of knowledge. علما عنده لم يطلع عليه أحدا من خلقه. There is one type of divine knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not disclose to any of His creation. There is some knowledge that Allah keeps for Himself, that He doesn't even reveal to the Prophet. He doesn't share it with anyone. For example, one example that our ulama give is that the time of Qiyamah is a knowledge that Allah has reserved for Himself. This is the mashhur opinion of our ulama, that the Imams, they might know the signs, they might have details about Qiyamah, but Allah has reserved the exact time of Qiyamah for Himself. There are certain names that Allah Azza wa Jal, names that He has given Himself, that He has not shared with His creation. So Imam al-Sadiq, he says, there is some divine knowledge that is exclusive to Allah. He does not disclose it to anybody. This is the first type of knowledge. وَعِلْمًا نَبَذَهُ إِلَى مَلَائِكَتِهِ وَرُسُلِهِ. And there is a type of knowledge. The second type of knowledge is the knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives to His angels. You know, Allah gives knowledge to His angels. The malaika, one of the functions of malaika is they are the administrators of creation. You know, to run creation, it requires ilm. You know, if I appoint you and I say, I need you to run and be the manager of an automotive factory, can you do it without knowledge? You need knowledge. So these angels, Allah gives them knowledge in order that they can fulfill the role that Allah has given them. Jibreel has knowledge. Mikael has knowledge. Malakul Maut, the angel of death, Allah gave him knowledge. The ability to extract souls. This is a type of ilm. So all of the malaika, they are given knowledge. And Allah, He also gives knowledge to His messengers, to His prophets. So the second type of knowledge is knowledge that Allah shares. This is knowledge that is shared. فَقَدْ انْتَهَى إِلَيْنَا. Imam al-Sadiq, he says, this knowledge that Allah shared with angels, the knowledge that He gave Adam from the beginning, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, the knowledge that He gave Nuh, the knowledge that He gave Musa, Ibrahim. Imam, he says, all of the knowledge that Allah gave the angels, all of the knowledge that was given to the prophets, that knowledge eventually came to us, Ahlul Bayt. They inherited this legacy of knowledge. So, this is a very important distinction. If someone says to you, as a follower of Ahlul Bayt, you say that your Imam has knowledge of all of these things, what's the difference between the knowledge of Allah and the knowledge of your Imam? Now you have an answer. You have a response. There's another narration where Al-Harith ibn al-Mughira, he says, and these narrations are from Al-Kafi, Kitab al-Kafi. An Abi Abdullah, he has a conversation again with Imam al-Sadiq. قلت أخبرني عن علم عالمكم. The narrator, he says, O Imam, tell me about the knowledge of the Imams, the knowledge of your learned ones, which is a code word for Imams. You know, sometimes the Shia, they used to refer to the Imams not as Imams, they used to call them Al-Abdul Salih, the righteous servant, the learned one, because Shias were persecuted. So they had to use this language that was enshrouded in mystery to protect themselves from the tyrants and the oppressive governments. So he's asking the Imam, tell me about the knowledge of the Imam. Where does this knowledge come from? قال وراثة من رسول الله ومن علي. Imam al-Sadiq, he says, the knowledge that we Ahlul Bayt have, it is knowledge that we inherited from the Prophet and from Ali ibn Abi Talib. What does this mean? Is knowledge, transferred through genetic code? Is this what the Imam is talking about? Or is he speaking about a literal inheritance? You see, we have many ahadith that tell us about private gatherings between Rasulullah and Amir al-Mu'mineen. In fact, we have narrations that say every day, every morning, and every evening, Rasulullah used to have a private session with Ali ibn Abi Talib. He would give him knowledge, because the ordinary Muslim, the Prophet is basically teaching them, don't worship an idol, worship Allah. We have one God. Basics, elementary stuff. Be kind to your parents, don't oppress the orphan. But the deeper knowledge, the deep knowledge is given to who? Is given to the person who was just worshiping idols? Or is it given to the one who has the capacity to take that knowledge? It's given to Amir al-Mu'mineen. So over more than 2 decades, the Prophet is dictating wisdom and knowledge to Ali ibn Abi Talib. And this is what is known as Kitabu Ali, the book of Ali. And this book, it was preserved. This is a book, for example, that contains the explanation of the ayat of the Quran. It contains information about past nations, about what is to happen in the future, comprehensive code of law, and so on and so forth. This book was passed down from Imam to Imam. So much so that, for example, during the time of Imam Zainul Abidin, during the time of Imam al-Baqir, people would come to the Imam and they would ask the Imam a very detailed question in fiqh. What is the inheritance of grandparents? If someone dies and they don't have any children and they don't have spouses, what is the share of grandparents, for example? The Imam would say to his servant, bring the book of Ali. And they would find the answer to any mas'ala that they had from this book. So one source, one channel of knowledge is this legacy of knowledge that was left by the Prophet and by Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is one of the channels. They receive knowledge from many different avenues. And then the narrator, he says, قال قلت إنا نتحدث أنه يقذف في قلوبكم وينكت في آذانكم. We, the Shias, we have a belief. We tell our fellow Shias that the Imam, one of the ways in which the Imam receives knowledge is that Allah, He casts the knowledge in their hearts, a type of inspiration. So what does the Imam say? قال أو ذاك. He says that is another way in which we receive knowledge. So you see, as followers of Ahlul Bayt, you see the centrality of knowledge in our tradition. The reason why we follow our A'imma is because they're the most learned of people. We are a madhab that is built on this concept of following the ones who are most learned. You know, that's why even when we do taqleed, we have this notion of following the a'lam because of the importance of knowledge. It's not about, bloodline. It's not about, following famous families. It's about ilm. So this is the first part of the hadith. The narrator highlighting the immense knowledge of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam. And then the hadith continues. وَكَانَ كَلَامُهُ كُلُّهُ وَجَوَابُهُ وَتَمَثُّلُهُ انتزاعات مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. Allah. He says, and he's someone who observed the speeches and the interactions of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam. He says all of his speeches, all of his responses, all of the examples and the parables and the illustrations that he would give, every single answer that Ali ibn Musa al-Ridha would give would be extracted from the Quran. All of his answers, they had a basis in the Quran. And this is a very important lesson for us. The Imams, they want their Shia to be what? To be Quran centric. That doesn't mean hadith are not important. But even when you look at the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt, you find that the general principles of all of their words, they go back to the Quran. And what's interesting is that Allah actually tells us that the foundation of everything is in the Quran. In Surah An-Nahl, Surah 16, Ayah 89. This is a good verse to reflect upon, to think about. Allah says, وَنَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْكِتَابِ. Ya Rasulullah, we sent down upon you the book. What is the book? The Quran. What is this Quran? What makes this Quran special? تِبْيَانًا لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Tibyan means that the Quran provides an explanation for everything. Now you might think, well, if I have chemistry homework, should I open up the Quran and find the periodic table? Is this what Allah is saying? If I want an answer about physiology, should I try to figure out, how many bones are in the human body and just look it up in the Quran? No. The Quran is not a book of science. But any issues that human beings face, the general principles can be derived from the Quran. You and I, we might struggle to find the answer in the Quran. We're facing, for example, the proliferation of AI technology. And you might think that, okay, AI is new. Surely there is nothing in the Quran that gives us guidance on how to use AI. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, what does he say? He says, مَا مِنْ أَمْرٍ يَخْتَلِفُ فِيهِ اثْنَانٍ إِلَّا وَلَهُ أَصْلٌ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. If you look at AI, for example, you have some people that support it. They believe it's good for the advancement of humanity, and you have those who are against it. So when it comes to AI, there's ikhtilaf, there's dispute. When it comes to any issue, you have people on both sides. You have supporters and you have naysayers. So the Imam says there is not a single issue that people dispute over unless you find guidance about that issue in the Quran. لكن لا تبلغه عقول الرجال. The answer is in the Quran, but it requires a superior intellect to extract its meaning from the Quran. Who can extract this type of guidance from the Quran? Is this strictly an intellectual activity where we have to find the smartest person to do it? Allah tells us that to understand the Quran, it's not just about this. It's about this. It's about the heart. Allah Azza wa Jal in Surah Al-Waqi'ah, what does He say? إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ كَرِيمٌ. Verily, it is a noble Quran. It is a generous Quran. It's a very giving Quran. It gives guidance. It gives direction. فِي كِتَابٍ مَكْنُونٍ. Don't think that the real Quran, the totality, the essence of the Quran is this book that you have in front of you. No, the reality of the Quran is في كتاب مكنون. It's in Lawh al-Mahfuz. This Quran is a reflection of that book that exists in those higher worlds. Who has access to that Quran? لا يمسه إلا المطهرون. The ones who can touch it, the ones who can access it are those who are pure. Not just pure, they are purified by God. They're purified by Allah. These are the only people who can touch. You see, this ayah is not prescriptive. It's not saying that, If you want to touch the Quran, you have to make wudu. It's not what the ayah is saying. This is a descriptive ayah. It's not prescriptive. Meaning it's describing the people who can touch the meanings of the Quran. They are who? Al-Mutahharun. If you look at the Quran, who are the most purified people according to the Quran? Allah, He tells us in Surah Al-Ahzab, إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. اللهم صل على. These are the people. And Imam Ali ibn Musa Ar-Ridha, he's one of those people. He is mutahhar, and hence he is able to respond to any issue using the Quran. And the more we purify our hearts on a practical level, when we stop sinning, when we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will start to benefit from the Quran more. The Quran, if you think of this analogy, think of the Quran as a very shy woman who does not uncover herself in front of non-mahram. Some of us, a woman who is modest, she will not uncover her hair in front of a stranger. Why? Because you're a stranger to her. The Quran is like that. Some of us, we are a stranger to the Quran. So the Quran, it keeps itself covered around us until we develop a more intimate relationship with the Quran. Eventually, what happens? We have a sort of mahram relationship with the Quran where the Quran starts to unveil itself to us. And then we come to the next part of the hadith. So the first part of the hadith was showcasing the knowledge of the Imam. Now we look at Imam Ar-Ridha's relationship with the Quran. What was his relationship with the Quran like? وَكَانَ يَخْتِمُهُ فِي كُلِّ ثَلَاثٍ. How many of you recite the entire Quran in the month of Ramadan? Many of us, every day in the month of Ramadan, we recite a juz. And for us, it's like climbing Mount Everest. Especially if we fall behind and the ajza start to accumulate. For many of us, that's a big challenge to recite one juz of the Quran per day. This narrator, he says Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam used to do a khatma of the Quran every 3 days. Every 3 days, Imam would recite the entire Quran. I calculated it. I went on ChatGPT and I typed in, how long does it take to recite 1/3 of the Quran? And subhanAllah, ChatGPT, it's like speaking to Ayatullah al-Uzma. It gives you so many details and scenarios. On average, it would take you, if you're an average reader, it would take you about 8 hours, 7-8 hours to recite 1/3 of the Quran, if you were to recite non-stop. Now, let's say that that's too difficult. It seems, according to this narration, that Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam probably spent 3.5 to 4 hours a night reciting Quran, and maybe early in the day reciting for 3 to 4 hours. Now, I'm not mentioning this hadith so that you and I, of course, this is probably beyond what we can do. Because for many of us, reciting the Quran for that long is too exhausting. We wouldn't enjoy it. But Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, he enjoyed it. And if you try to understand, how can someone be engaged with the Quran for that many hours? There are some people today, they spend 7-8 hours a day on social media. They don't even feel it. There are some youngsters, they will spend, especially if it's summer vacation, they will spend maybe 10 hours a day playing video games. If you ask them, how do you do it? This is a mu'jiza. How are you doing this? You don't eat, mashallah. You sit in one position. How does the blood get to your legs? How do you sit for that long? How do you spend that much time? How do they do it? Because they're in another world. They don't feel the time. It doesn't feel like a burden to them because they're enjoying it. When Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, when he recites the Quran, it's as if he's soaring in the heavens and the earth. He doesn't see it as this mundane task. Now, why does the Imam recite it once every 3 days? Look at what the Imam says. Wallah, when I read this hadith, I had to pause and just walk around the house just to absorb it. وَيَقُول, when the Imam was asked, Ya ibn Rasulullah, you recite the Quran completely every 3 days, yani every 72 hours, you do a khatma of the Quran. ويقول لو أردت أن أختمه في أقرب من 3 لختمت. The Imam says, I could do it faster than that. I could recite it even in 2 days, a day and a half. So he says that the reason that it takes me 3 days instead of 2, he says, ولكني ما مررت بآية قط إلا فكرت فيها وفي أي شيء نزلت وفي أي وقت. He says the reason why it takes me 3 days is because I do tadabbur of the Quran. Because I reflect. When I read about paradise, I feel the pleasures of paradise. When I read about the akhirah, I pause and I think about that day of accountability. So this is 3 days. And the Imam is saying that this is slow for me because I'm pausing and reflecting on the Quran. Now, I'm not mentioning this for you to come because, sometimes in these majalis, we come and we don't hear anything that's inspiring. It's always about how we're failing. You come to the majlis, okay, and you hear about, okay, here are 10 other ways in which you're failing in your life. Have a nice weekend. We need something that's also inspiring. The Imams, they always also tell us that you can't be like us. So what should we do? Is there a way that we can have a more meaningful relationship with the Quran? There is an entire, subhanAllah, when it comes to Ahlul Bayt, not only did they teach us the Quran, but they also teach us how much Quran we should recite every day. They give us a prescription. And they give us a minimum. There should be a minimum amount that we recite every day. And it's not that difficult. In fact, if you look at Kitab Wasa'il al-Shi'a, there's a section that says, Babu ta'akkud istihbab tilawat 50 ayah fasa'idan fi kulli yawm. There's an entire section of ahadith where the Imams explain to us that the bare minimum that you should recite every day in terms of number of ayat is 50 ayat per day. That's the minimum. You might think 50 ayat, wow, that's a lot. No, it's not a lot. You can recite from Juz'u Amma. It literally will take you maybe 5 minutes or less to recite 50 ayat. Qaf, yallah, that one letter is one ayah. There you go. You have 49 left. It's not difficult. Now you might wonder, so let me just read this hadith for you, and then we'll explain, and then inshallah we'll end soon. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, la sallu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Are you guys excited? Are you guys as excited as I am? Or is there a disconnect? So, the hadith from the 6th Imam, he says, Al-Qur'anu ahdullah ila khalqi. The Quran is not just this book that was written down 14 centuries ago. The Quran is a living document. It's a living covenant between you and Allah. This is a book that represents what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as your creator, what He expects from you. What is needed from you so that you can have a beautiful relationship with Him. So this is a covenant. This is a contract between you and Allah Azza wa Jal. فَقَدْ يَنْبَغِي لِلْمَرْءِ الْمُسْلِمِ أَنْ يَنْظُرَ فِي عَهْدِهِ. You know, when you have a relationship, when you have a business, when you have a contract, it's important that you look at the terms and conditions of this covenant, of this contract. The Quran is that covenant. And then the Imam says it behooves every Muslim to look into this covenant. وَأَن يَقْرَأْ مِنْهُ فِي كُلِّ يَوْمٍ 50 آية. You should read a minimum of 50 ayat per day. So inshallah, as a community, that needs to be our goal. Starting tonight, you put it in your notes, you put an alarm, 50 ayat per day. As I said, you can recite one of the surahs of Juz' Amma, maybe 80% of the ayat will be completed. It's not difficult. You make that into a habit and then slowly you add. And if you can't read properly, at least listen. Listen. And by the way, don't be discouraged if you stumble when you read. For some people, it might take them a half an hour just to read one page of the Quran. Maybe half an hour just to read half a page. Don't think that, okay, I'm not good at this. I'm wasting my time. We have ahadith that say that a person who struggles when they read the Quran, they are given 2 rewards. They are rewarded for reading the Quran and they are rewarded for struggling to read the Quran. So even that struggle is appreciated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't be discouraged. None of us were born as reciters of the Quran. We all learned. There was a time where I didn't know how to read. Someone taught me. So if I can learn, we can all learn. So 50 ayat. Now why 50 ayat? The Imams, they don't just give random numbers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. But it seems that when you make a habit of reading 50 verses, 50 ayat of the Quran will typically give you exposure to a number of important topics. You read 50 ayat, it's the equivalent of taking a spiritual multivitamin. You know, multivitamins, they contain different minerals. It's a mixture. When you recite 50 ayat of the Quran, chances are there's going to be a reminder about Allah, His mercy, the hereafter, maybe a story about the Prophet. You get a mixture of spiritual advice that functions as the bare minimum immunity that you need for that day. 50 ayat. So let's make an effort to expose ourselves to those 50 ayat per day. And then the Imam alayhi salam, he says, وَمِن كَلَامِهِ الْمَشْهُورِ قَوْلُهُ. The narrator, he says, so if you look at this hadith, it's very beautiful. He begins by speaking about the immense knowledge of Imam Ar-Ridha and how all of his answers are extracted from the Quran, and then his personal relationship with the Quran. And then here he says, he shares the most popular advice that Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam used to give. The kalam that was mashhur. So this is advice that he used to repeat. وَمِن كَلَامِهِ الْمَشْهُورِ قَوْلُهُ الصَّغَائِرُ مِنَ الذُّنُوبِ طُرُقٌ إِلَى الْكَبَائِرِ. Imam, he says, small sins, they are the pathways to major sins. This is so important. You know, brothers and sisters, God forbid, if someone commits adultery, someone commits zina, do you think people wake up one day and say, you know what? I'm going to commit adultery today. It doesn't happen like that. They are small transgressions. It starts with what? A glance, right? Oh, the first glance is halal, and then he prolongs the glance, and then a second glance, and we're just talking, we're just joking. Oh, it's just a handshake, it's just a hug. You see, when we become desensitized to the small sins, right? As we say, the first crack in the dam. The small sins accumulate, and then gradually you commit the major sins. So the Imam says, beware of those small sins. Because most people, they destroy themselves through these small spiritual paper cuts. Think of small sins as little cuts. Yes, one way to bleed out is if you sever a limb and you bleed out. But sometimes many people, what do? They inflict these small wounds, and they accumulate until you collapse. الصغائر من الذنوب طرق إلى الكبائر. So beware of those small sins, because those small sins, they evolve into major sins. وَمَنْ لَمْ يَخَفِ اللَّهَ فِي الْقَلِيلِ لَمْ يَخِفْهُ فِي الْكَثِيرِ. If you don't fear Allah with respect to small issues, eventually you're not going to fear Allah when it comes to the big issues. So you have to be very vigilant. You have to watch yourself. You have to monitor yourself. And then the Imam, he says, وَمَنْ لَمْ يُخَوِّفِ اللَّهُ النَّاسَ بِجَنَّةٍ وَنَارٍ لَكَانَ الْوَاجِبُ عَلَيْهِمْ أَنْ يُطِيعُوهُ وَلَا يَعْصُوهُ. The Imam says, even if Allah did not have a punishment and reward system, let's say that there was no Jannah and there was no Nar, there was no paradise and there was no hell. Allah doesn't threaten you with punishment. The Imam says, rationally, it would still be an obligation for you to obey Him. Why? لِتَفَضُّلِهِ عَلَيْهِمْ وَإِحْسَانِهِ إِلَيْهِمْ وَمَا بَدَأَهُمْ بِهِ مِنْ إِنْعَامِهِ الَّذِي مَا اسْتَحَقُّوهُ. The reason why you should never disobey Allah is because of how kind He has been to you. There are some people in your life, you're very loyal to them. You would never do anything to hurt them or offend them. Why? Because you're grateful for the times when they stood by you. Because they were good to you. Because they helped you in a way that no one could help you. Maybe they stuck by you through that very bitter divorce. Maybe they helped you get a job when no one else was there for you. Maybe they were by your hospital bed when everyone else abandoned you. So you feel very loyal to them. Why? Because they showed you so much kindness. So even if something happens that you're tempted to do something, you hold yourself back because you don't want to offend that loyal friend. Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, he says, hasn't Allah been there for you? Hasn't Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given you what no one else can give you? So why does Allah have to threaten you with punishment and reward for you to obey Him? Why can you not obey Him out of your loyalty to Him? Because of His mercy, because of His blessings, because of His bounties. And He gave you all of this while you did not deserve it. We don't have a right over Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't owe us anything. You see how these words of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, they change your perspective. You no longer have this transactional relationship with Allah where, oh Allah, I'm going to do this because I want you to give me a reward. Again, it's not haram to think like that. But we want to rise above transactional religiosity to what? Transformative spirituality, where everything is based on gratitude. Everything's based on this appreciation for Allah, this loyalty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'll end with this, and inshallah we'll conclude. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his relationship with Allah was based on this type of love. It was a relationship that was based on his deep sense of gratitude to Allah. Most of us, if not all of us, the reason why we do our salah is because if we don't, Allah's going to punish us. It's not even the reward that's motivating us. Because Allah promises great reward for Salatul Layl. But how many people pray Salatul Layl? Most people don't pray Salatul Layl. So many of us, we don't have the carrot relationship. You know the stick and the carrot analogy? With us and Allah, He uses the stick with us because that's the only way we stick to the right path. But the Prophet was different. And believe me, if we can get to a point where we have this type of relationship with Allah, we'll have a different experience. There's one narration that's found in both Sunni and Shia hadith sources that says that one day Aisha, the Prophet was with her. She wakes up in the middle of the night and she saw that the Prophet is not in bed. So she was wondering, what happened? Did he sneak out of the house? Did he leave? Is he with one of his other wives? She had a little bit of jealousy, so she was hunting and searching. Where's the Prophet? So Imam al-Baqir, he says, كان رسول الله عند عائشة ليلتها. He would spend each night with a different wife, and each wife used to consider that time very precious. So she sees that the Prophet is not in bed. Where did he go? So she sees the Prophet standing in salah. And he's crying, shedding tears, standing for long periods in ibadah. And she could not understand why he's exerting himself in this way. Do the wajibat and that's it. 5 daily prayers and that's it. So she sees the Prophet doing this extra ibadah. She says, Ya Rasulullah, lima tut'ib nafsak? Why are you tiring yourself? وَقَدْ غَفَرَ اللَّهُ لَكَ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِكَ وَمَا تَأَخَّرَ. Allah Azza wa Jal, He's going to give you the highest place in Jannah. People enter Jannah because of your shafa'ah. You have nothing to worry about. Why are you doing all of this extra ibadah? فقال صلى الله عليه وآله ألا أكون عبدا شكورا. Should I not be a grateful servant? Should I not be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No matter what I do, I cannot repay Allah Azza wa Jal for what He has given me. This spirit of gratitude, it existed in all of the Imams of Ahlul Bayt. And inshallah, in these last moments, I want all of us to take our hearts to Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam in Mashhad. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to visit Ali ibn Musa Ar-Ridha. Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, he actually foretold his martyrdom. Allah had given him the knowledge of what is to happen to him in this strange land. The narration says, عن عبد السلام ابن صالح الهروي. The narrator says, سمعت الرضا يقول, I heard Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam say, سأقتل بالسم مسموما مظلوما. The Imam alayhi salam, he says, I will be killed here. I will be killed through poisoning. I will be oppressed and martyred through poisoning. وَأُقْبَرُ إِلَى جَنْبِ هَارُونَ. Look at the mazlumiyah of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam. Not only is he poisoned in Khurasan, but they bury him besides the murderer of his father. If you were to ask Imam Ar-Ridha, Ya ibn Rasulillah, where do you want to be buried? I'm sure he would have said, I want to be buried beside Rasulullah in Medina. Or I want to be buried besides my forefathers in Jannatul Baqi'. But they bury Imam Ar-Ridha besides the tyrant Harun. And then the Imam alayhi salam, he says about his grave, وَيَجْعَلُ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ تُرْبَتِي مُخْتَلَفَ شِيعَتِي وَأَهْلِ بَيْتِي. My grave will eventually become a place that is frequented by my followers and my family. فمن زارني في غربتي, whoever visits me in Khurasan, whoever visits me when I am there in that strange land, whoever visits me while I am a gharib, وجبت له زيارتي يوم القيامة. Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam, he says, whoever comes to Khurasan and visits me, it will be wajib upon me to visit them on the day of Qiyamah. And then he says, وَالَّذِي أَكْرَمَ مُحَمَّدًا بِالنُّبُوَّةِ وَاصْطَفَاهُ عَلَى جَمِيعِ الْخَلِيقَةِ. I swear by Rasulullah, who was chosen above all of creation, لا يصلي أحد منكم عند قبري ركعتين إلا استحق المغفرة من الله عز وجل يوم يلقى. Whoever prays a 2 rak'ah prayer besides my grave will earn the forgiveness of Allah on the day that they meet their Lord. ثم قال والذي أكرمنا بعد محمد بالإمامة. I swear by Allah, the one who honored Muhammad through imamah, through our imamah, وخصنا بالوصية إن زيارة قبري إن زوار قبري, the one who comes and visits my grave on the day of judgment, the Imam alayhi salam says, not a single believer will come and travel to my grave, and if a single drop of rain falls upon their face, if they face any struggle in their ziyarah to me, the Imam alayhi salam says that their bodies will never touch the fire of Allah. Hawla wa la قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to illuminate our hearts with the words of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to honor us with the ziyarah of Imam Ar-Ridha alayhi salam. And most importantly, we ask him to resurrect us with Ali ibn Musa Ar-Ridha on the day of judgment. يوم لا ينفع مال ولا بنون إلا من أتى الله بقلب سليم. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.